For 7 years, the boy touched his ear. Every doctor said the same thing. Nothing we can do. His father spent $12 million, flew specialists in from Boston, Cleveland, Stanford, begged them to look again. They all shrugged. Then a maid noticed something no one else did, and what she pulled from that child's ear will leave you speechless. Frederick Sanders was a billionaire, hedge fund founder, Manhattan penthouses, Westchester estates, more wealth than most families see in 10 generations. But his son Patrick was born deaf, 7 years old, never heard a sound. Frederick tried everything: Johns Hopkins, Cleveland Clinic, private audiology labs charging thousands per hour. They ran tests, scans, consultations. All of them said the same thing: irreversible. Accept it. But Frederick couldn't accept it, because Patrick was all he had left. His wife died giving birth to that boy at a private hospital on the Upper East Side. Complications, they called it. So Frederick kept searching, kept spending, kept begging God for an answer. What he didn't know: the answer wasn't coming from a hospital. It was coming from the woman he'd just hired to clean his floors. Linda Peters was a maid, 29, no medical degree, no credentials, just a woman from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, trying to pay her younger brother's hearing aid bills. But she noticed something about Patrick that every specialist had missed. Something in his ear, something dark. And one afternoon, while Frederick was away in Midtown Manhattan, she made a decision that would either save that boy's life or destroy her own. What happened next? I need you to see it for yourself. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button, smash the like if you believe miracles don't always wear white coats, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I believe this story found you today for a reason. The Sanders estate stretched across 15 acres of Westchester County land overlooking the Hudson River. From the outside, it looked like a dream. Restored colonial architecture, windows that caught the afternoon sun, gardens manicured to impossible perfection. But inside, silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the kind that feels like rest. This silence was heavy, suffocating, like something had died and no one had buried it yet. Staff moved through the hallways without speaking, their footsteps soft, careful. They'd learned quickly Mr. Sanders preferred things quiet. No music played in that house, no television noise, no laughter bouncing off the walls lined with family portraits and framed medical certificates. Just silence. And somewhere in that silence, a father was drowning. Frederick Sanders sat in his study most evenings, staring at the oil portrait above the mahogany fireplace. There she was, Catherine, his wife. Her smile frozen in paint, her eyes still bright, still alive. Next to her, a younger version of himself, looking hopeful, looking whole. And between them, Patrick, at 18 months old. Before Frederick understood that his son would never hear his mother's name, Catherine died the day Patrick was born. Complications, the doctors at the Upper East Side Hospital called it. Too much bleeding, too little time. Frederick held her hand while the light left her eyes. She'd been trying to say something, her lips moved, but no sound came out. Just like their son, Frederick never forgave himself. If he'd chosen a different hospital, if he'd demanded better specialists, if he'd been paying closer attention, maybe she'd still be here. Maybe Patrick would be different. The guilt sat on his chest like a stone he couldn't lift. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He spent money, millions of dollars, the best specialists on earth, flights across the country, consultations that cost more per hour than most people earned in a week. Johns Hopkins, Cleveland Clinic, Stanford Children's Hospital, audiology experts flown in from Boston. Every single one of them said the same thing. Your son's deafness is congenital, irreversible. There's nothing we can do. You need to accept this. Accept it. How could he accept that his boy would live in silence forever? How could he accept that Patrick would never hear his father say, "I'm sorry your mother isn't here"? So Frederick kept searching, kept writing checks, kept hoping that somewhere out there, someone had the answer. He didn't realize the answer wasn't coming from a specialist. It was coming from someone he'd never think to look at twice. Someone who was about to walk through his front door with nothing but instinct in her heart and bills she couldn't pay. Her name was Linda Peters, and she was about to change everything. Linda K. Peters arrived on a Wednesday morning in late September. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that makes everything feel heavier than it should. She stood at the iron gates of the Sanders estate, clutching her single suitcase with both hands, trying to steady her breathing. This was it. Her last chance. Back in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, her younger brother Michael was struggling. Born with partial hearing loss, he needed new hearing aids, the kind insurance didn't cover. $4,200. That's what the audiologist said. The bills were piling up on Linda's kitchen table like a tower she couldn't stop from growing. 3 months behind on rent. That's what the notice said. If she didn't pay, eviction. And if she got evicted, Michael's care would fall apart completely. Linda couldn't let that happen. Michael was 12 when their parents died in a factory accident outside Pittsburgh. Linda had been 19. She'd raised him, fed him when there was nothing in the fridge, sat with him through every doctor's appointment, learned sign language so he'd never feel alone. That boy deserved better than a sister who couldn't keep a roof over his head. So Linda took this job. Live-in maid at a billionaire's mansion. She didn't care about the fancy address, didn't care about the wealthy family. She just needed the paycheck. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Eleanor Winters, met her at the door. Stern face, sharp eyes, the kind of woman who noticed everything and forgave nothing. "You're Linda." "Yes, ma'am." "You'll clean, you'll stay quiet, you'll keep to yourself. Mr. Sanders doesn't like disruptions, especially around his son." Linda nodded. "I understand. Do you, Mrs.?" Winter's eyes narrowed. Because the last girl didn't. She tried to get too friendly with the boy, thought she could help. She was gone within a week. Linda swallowed. "I'm just here to work, ma'am." Mrs. Winters studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Follow me." As they walked through the mansion, Linda kept her eyes down, but she couldn't help noticing things. The silence, so thick it felt alive. The way the other staff moved, without speaking, without smiling, the heaviness that hung in the air like fog that wouldn't lift. And then she saw him. A small boy sitting on the marble staircase, arranging toy cars in a perfect line. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge anyone. His shoulders were hunched, his movements careful, precise. But what caught Linda's attention was something else, the way he kept touching his right ear, just briefly, almost like a habit, and the tiny winces that crossed his face each time he did. Linda's chest tightened. She'd seen that look before, on Michael, years ago, before they diagnosed his condition. That wasn't a habit, that was pain. She didn't say anything, just kept walking. But her heart whispered something she couldn't ignore. Pay attention. Days passed. Linda cleaned floors, wiped windows, folded linens. She kept her head down like Mrs. Winters told her, but she couldn't stop watching Patrick. Every morning, same routine. The boy would sit alone in the sunroom, surrounded by model airplanes and jigsaw puzzles. His world was small, contained, safe. No one bothered him there. Frederick Sanders didn't believe in things money couldn't fix. The morning after Catherine died, he'd made a promise to her photograph. "I'll give him everything. Everything." He started with Johns Hopkins. Dr. Raymond Mitchell, Chief of Pediatric Audiology. $15,000 for the initial consultation, 3 days of testing, MRI scans, auditory brainstem response evaluations, genetic panels that cost more than most cars. The verdict came on a Tuesday afternoon in a sterile office overlooking Baltimore Harbor. Congenital sensory neural hearing loss, bilateral, profound. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sanders. There's nothing we can do." Frederick wrote another check. Cleveland Clinic was next. Dr. Sarah Chen, internationally recognized. They flew Patrick to Ohio in a private jet. More tests. More scans. More doctors in white coats nodding sympathetically. The auditory nerve development is incomplete. Surgery isn't an option. Cochlear implants won't work in this case. It's irreversible. Frederick called Stanford. Dr. James Whitmore. Experimental therapies. Clinical trials. Patrick spent 6 weeks in Palo Alto while specialists ran every test modern medicine could offer. The answer never changed. Congenital. Irreversible. Accept it. But acceptance wasn't something Frederick Sanders knew how to do. So Patrick's childhood became a carefully constructed routine. Speech therapists 3 times weekly, sign language tutors, occupational therapy, educational specialists who cost $200 per hour. The sunroom became Patrick's world. Puzzles arranged by difficulty, model airplanes hung from the ceiling in perfect rows, books about things he'd never hear, trains, orchestras, thunderstorms. Frederick watched from doorways, his guilt growing with each silent year. No laughter, no crying out for Dad in the middle of the night, no first words, just silence, and Frederick's certainty that somewhere, somehow, the right doctor would have the answer. Money had never failed him before. Money built empires. Money moved markets. Money should cure his son. It had to. He kept every medical file in his study. Hundreds of pages, reports from Boston audiology labs, consultation notes from specialists in 3 states. One afternoon, reviewing Cleveland Clinic records for the 4th time, his eyes caught something he'd dismissed before. Dr. Chen's notes from the initial exam. Visual inspection, noted dark mass, right ear canal. Likely cerumen buildup, consistent with congenital condition. Does not affect primary diagnosis. Frederick stared at those words. Dark mass. He picked up his phone, dialed Dr. Chen's office. The note about the dark mass, should we have that examined? Dr. Chen's voice was patient, professional. Mr. Sanders, we see that frequently with congenital deafness. It's not relevant to your son's condition. The nerve damage is the issue, not the ear canal. Frederick hung up. The doctor was right. Of course she was right. She had credentials, experience, international recognition. He closed the file. Outside, through his study window, he could see Patrick in the sunroom. Small fingers pressed against his right ear again. Just a nervous habit, the therapist said. Frederick believed them. He had to believe someone. Linda's room was on the 3rd floor. Small, clean, functional. A single bed, a dresser, a window overlooking the gardens. She unpacked slowly, arranging Michael's photo on the nightstand. Her brother's gap-toothed smile, frozen at age 7, before the hearing aids, before everything got complicated. This job wasn't about luxury. It was about $2,800 monthly, enough to cover rent in Lancaster, Michael's audiologist, bills, and the hearing aids he'd outgrown 2 years ago. Mrs. Winters appeared in the doorway at exactly 6 a.m. The next morning. Uniforms in the closet. Breakfast is at 6:30 in the staff kitchen. Work begins at 7. You'll clean the east wing first, Mr. Sanders' study, the library, the sunroom. Linda nodded, pulling on the simple black dress and white apron. One more thing, Mrs. Winters' voice dropped. You do not touch the child. You do not speak to the child unless he initiates. You do not offer suggestions about his care. Medical professionals handle that. Understood? Yes, ma'am. The last maid thought she knew better than doctors. She lasted 4 days. Linda kept her face neutral. I understand. The east wing was vast. Hardwood floors that showed every footprint. Windows that required standing on ladders. Shelves lined with books no one read. The silence was worse in daylight. It pressed against Linda's ears like water pressure. She was dusting the library when she heard it. Footsteps. Small, careful. Patrick appeared in the doorway. 7 years old, maybe 45 pounds. Brown hair that needed cutting. Eyes that seemed older than they should. He didn't look at her. Just walked to the window seat, sat down with a picture book, and began turning pages. Linda continued dusting, keeping her movements quiet. That's when she saw it. Patrick's right hand drifted to his ear. Pressed. His face tightened just for a second. A micro-expression of discomfort that vanished as quickly as it came. He turned another page. 30 seconds later, the hand went back to his ear. Press. Wince. Release. Linda's chest constricted. She knew that gesture. Michael used to do the same thing before his diagnosis. Before they'd discovered the chronic ear infections that worsened his hearing loss. That wasn't absent-mindedness. That was pain. Patrick shifted in his seat, and Linda caught a glimpse of his right ear in the morning light. Something dark, just inside the canal. A shadow that didn't belong. Her hands stilled on the bookshelf. This isn't deafness, her instinct whispered. This is suffering. But Mrs. Winters' warning echoed louder. You do not offer suggestions. Medical professionals handle that. Linda returned to dusting. Patrick turned another page, pressed his ear again, and winced. She said nothing, but she watched. Every movement, every touch, every silent expression of pain that 7 years of specialists had somehow missed. Mrs. Winters was wrong about one thing. Linda wasn't like the last maid. She wouldn't speak out of turn, but she wouldn't look away either. 3 days. That's how long it took Linda to recognize the pattern. Morning. Patrick touched his right ear 6 times before breakfast. Afternoon. 12 times during his tutoring session in the sunroom. Night. Linda heard him through the walls. Soft footsteps pacing his bedroom, the creak of his bed frame, the sound of small hands pressing against skin. Always the same ear, always the right one. On Thursday, Dr. Eleanor Vance arrived for Patrick's monthly checkup. Linda was cleaning the hallway outside the examination room when she heard voices. "His behavior seems unchanged," Dr. Vance said. "Vital signs normal. No infections. No new developments." "The ear touching?" Frederick's voice, tired. "Common self-soothing behavior in deaf children. Nothing to worry about." Patrick never made a sound during the exam. Linda knew because she'd stopped dusting to listen. 20 minutes. That's how long the appointment lasted. No one looked inside his ear. Friday night, Linda called Michael from her room. "How are the new aids working?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "Good. Really good." Her brother's voice came through clearly. "Remember when mine used to hurt? Before they figured out the infection?" Linda's grip tightened on the phone. "You used to touch your ear constantly." "Yeah. It felt like pressure, like something was stuck." He paused. "Why?" "No reason. Just remembering." But it was a reason. Michael's infections had started the same way. Pain dismissed as behavior. Discomfort explained away as adjustment. Until the day he'd screamed. Saturday morning, Linda was changing Patrick's bedroom linens when he walked in unexpectedly. She froze. Rule number 3. Don't be in the child's room when he's present. Patrick didn't seem to notice. He climbed onto the window seat, pulled his knees to his chest. His hand went to his ear. Linda watched from the corner of her eye while folding the duvet. The morning light hit his face at the perfect angle. And she saw it, clearly. Something dark, deep inside his ear canal. Not wax, not shadow. Something solid. Lodged. Her heart hammered. She should tell someone. Mrs. Winters, Frederick, anyone. But Mrs. Winters' warning replayed in her mind. The last maid thought she knew better than doctors. She lasted 4 days. Linda had Michael's hearing aid payment due in 2 weeks. Rent due in 3. If she spoke up and she was wrong, or worse, if she was right but no one believed her, she'd lose everything. She finished making the bed in silence. Patrick pressed his ear again. Harder this time. Linda turned to leave. That's when she heard it. A sound so soft she almost missed it. A whimper, barely audible. Patrick's face crumpled. His shoulders shook. He was crying. Silently. The way children cry when they've learned no one's listening. Linda's hand gripped the doorframe. She stood there, frozen between 2 choices. Speak and risk everything, or stay silent and watch a child suffer. The door clicked shut behind her. Patrick remained alone, still touching his ear, still crying without sound. Sunday afternoon, Linda found Margaret E. Walker in the staff kitchen. Margaret had worked at the estate for 12 years, long enough to remember Catherine, long enough to know which rules could bend. "Can I ask you something?" Linda kept her voice casual, measuring coffee grounds. "Depends what it is." "Patrick. Does he? Has anyone noticed he touches his ear a lot?" Margaret's expression hardened instantly. "Linda, I just thought—" "Stop." Margaret set down her teacup. "I'm going to give you advice the last girl didn't take. Mr. Sanders has spent 7 years and millions of dollars on his son. Johns Hopkins, Cleveland Clinic, Stanford. Doctors we can't even pronounce the names of. I understand, but do you think you see something they missed?" Margaret's voice dropped. "Do you think you, with no medical training, know better than specialists who've dedicated their lives to this?" Linda's throat tightened. "No. I just—" "Then don't interfere. Patrick is cared for. You are here to clean." Margaret stood. The last maid made suggestions. Mr. Sanders had her escorted off the property within an hour. "Is that what you want?" Linda shook her head. "Good. Then we never had this conversation." That night, Frederick sat in his study reviewing files he'd read 100 times. Cleveland Clinic, Dr. Chen's initial examination notes. Visual inspection noted dark mass, right ear canal, likely cerumen buildup, consistent with congenital condition. Does not affect primary diagnosis. He'd called about this. Twice. Both times reassured it was irrelevant. Dr. Chen had credentials, awards, publications in medical journals. Frederick closed the file. Outside, Patrick's bedroom light was still on at 11 p.m. Frederick told himself it was fine. The boy had always been a poor sleeper. Monday morning, Frederick left early for Manhattan. Meetings downtown. Won't be back until after dinner. Linda was cleaning the second-floor hallway when she heard Patrick's door open. He walked past her, unsteady. His face was pale, drawn. His hand pressed against his ear, not gently this time, desperately. Linda watched him disappear down the stairs. Not your business, she told herself. You were warned. She returned to dusting. 30 minutes later, a crash echoed through the house. Linda dropped her cloth, ran toward the sound. The sunroom. Patrick was on the floor, convulsing. His right hand clawed at his ear, his mouth open in a scream no one could hear. Blood. On his fingers. On the floor. Seeping from his ear canal. Mrs. Winters appeared in the doorway. Oh God. Call 911. Now. Staff erupted into motion. Phones, towels, chaos. Linda knelt beside Patrick. His eyes found hers wide, terrified, pleading. She'd stayed silent. She'd followed the rules. She'd protected her job, and now a child was bleeding on the floor. Mrs. Winters pushed her aside. Get back. Don't touch him. Linda stood, her hands shaking. This was her fault. She'd seen it. She'd known, and she'd said nothing. Patrick's body went limp. His hand fell away from his ear, and deep inside the ear canal, Linda saw it clearly for the first time. Something dark, solid, foreign. Something that had been there all along. The paramedics were 8 minutes out. Patrick lay on the sunroom floor, eyes rolled back, body trembling. Blood pooled beneath his head. Mrs. Winters pressed a towel to his ear. Stay with us, Patrick. Stay with us. The other staff stood frozen, helpless. Linda knelt closer. Through the blood, through the chaos, she saw it clearly now. The obstruction. Dark, hardened, lodged deep, blocking everything. 8 minutes. Patrick could die in 8 minutes. Linda's hands moved before her mind could stop them. What are you doing? Mrs. Winters grabbed her wrist. There's something in his ear. Linda's voice was steady. I can see it. You are not a doctor. I know. Linda met her eyes. But if we wait, he might not make it. Mrs. Winters hesitated. 1 second. 2. Then she released Linda's wrist. Linda's fingers trembled as she tilted Patrick's head gently, angling toward the light. There, a mass, hardened, foreign, wedged against the eardrum. She'd seen Michael's doctor do this. Irrigation, extraction, steady hands. Please, God. Please. Linda braced Patrick's head with one hand. With the other, she reached carefully into the ear canal. Her fingernail caught the edge of the obstruction. She pulled. Slowly, steadily. The mass resisted. Then shifted. Patrick's body jerked. Almost, Linda whispered. Almost. One more pull. The obstruction came free. Dark, solid, the size of a small pebble, covered in hardened wax and dried blood. Linda held it in her palm, staring. 7 years. This had been there for 7 years. The room went silent. Then, Patrick's eyes opened, wide, confused. His head turned slightly, and froze. The grandfather clock in the hallway. Ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Patrick's face transformed. Shock, wonder, fear. Mrs. Winters shifted her weight. Her shoe scraped against the floor. Patrick's eyes snapped toward the sound. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. A sound came out. Small, broken, beautiful. Duh. His voice cracked. Tears spilled down his cheeks. Dad. The word hung in the air like a miracle. Mrs. Winters stumbled backward, hand over her mouth. The other staff stood paralyzed. Patrick touched his ear gently this time and flinched at the sound of his own hand against skin. Then he looked at Linda, really looked, and smiled. Linda's composure shattered. Tears streamed down her face. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the obstruction. You can hear, she whispered. Patrick's eyes widened at the sound of her voice. He nodded, then laughed, a sound he'd never heard himself make. Pure, unfiltered, joyful. The grandfather clock kept ticking. Footsteps thundered up the driveway. Paramedics burst through the front door, but they were too late. The miracle had already happened. Patrick Sanders could hear. And the first word he'd ever spoken was the one his father had waited 7 years to hear. Dad. Frederick's car tore up the driveway at 2:47 p.m. Mrs. Winters had called him mid-meeting. Emergency. Patrick collapsed. Ambulance on the way. He'd left his briefcase in the conference room, his phone calls unanswered, his driver breaking every speed limit between Midtown Manhattan and Westchester County. Frederick burst through the front door. The sunroom. Voices. Paramedics. He ran and stopped cold. Patrick sat on the floor, eyes wide and alert, dried blood on his neck, a towel pressed to his ear, and kneeling beside him the new maid, Linda, blood on her hands, blood on her uniform. "What did you do?" Frederick's voice came out raw, broken. Linda looked up. "Mr. Sanders, Get away from him." Frederick shoved past the paramedics, pulled Patrick into his arms. "What did you do to my son?" Mrs. Winters stepped forward. "Mr. Sanders," she removed something from his ear. "An obstruction." She what?" Frederick's face went white. "You let her touch him? You let a maid perform a medical procedure on my child?" "Sir, I can explain. Call security." Frederick's voice shook. "Call the police. I want her arrested for assault, for practicing medicine without a license, for, Dad." The word cut through the chaos like a knife. Everyone froze. Frederick's arms went slack around Patrick. "Dad," Patrick said again, louder this time. His voice small, uncertain, but clear. Frederick stared at his son. Patrick touched his own throat, feeling the vibration of sound. Then he looked at Frederick and smiled. "I can hear you." The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. Patrick turned toward it. "Clock." A paramedic's radio crackled. Patrick flinched. "What's that?" Frederick couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process what was happening. Mrs. Winters' voice broke the spell. "The doctors from White Plains Hospital are here." 2 physicians entered, Dr. Robert Finch and Dr. Amanda Torres. They'd been called from the emergency room, prepared for a crisis. Instead, they found a child speaking. "I need to examine him," Dr. Finch said, kneeling beside Patrick. "Son, can you hear my voice?" Patrick nodded. "Yes." Dr. Finch's eyes widened. He pulled an otoscope from his bag, examined Patrick's ear canal carefully. The room held its breath. "The eardrum is inflamed but intact," Dr. Finch said slowly. "The canal is clear. There's residual blood, but no permanent damage visible." Dr. Torres performed a hearing test. Whispered words, finger snaps, a tuning fork. Patrick responded to everything. "His hearing is functional," Dr. Torres said, her voice filled with disbelief. "Diminished in the right ear due to inflammation, but functional. This is impossible." Dr. Finch held up a small plastic bag containing the obstruction Linda had removed. "This was lodged against his eardrum?" Linda nodded. "For how long?" "I don't know," Linda whispered. "Years, maybe." Frederick sank to his knees. 7 years. Millions of dollars. Dozens of specialists. And the answer had been there all along. The room stood frozen in impossible truth. Patrick tugged his father's sleeve. "Dad," he said again, testing the word, tasting sound for the first time. Dr. Finch requested Patrick's medical records. Frederick retrieved them from his study, 7 years of files stacked in chronological order. Consultations, test results, expert opinions. Dr. Finch spread them across the dining room table while Patrick sat nearby, listening to the rustle of paper with wonder. 10 minutes of silence. Then Dr. Finch stopped on a page. His face went pale. "Mr. Sanders." "Come here." Frederick approached. Dr. Finch pointed to a section highlighted in yellow. "Cleveland Clinic." Dr. Sarah Chen's notes from 3 years ago. Visual inspection noted dark mass, right ear canal, likely cerumen buildup, consistent with congenital condition. Does not affect primary diagnosis. Frederick's hands gripped the table edge. "It was documented," Dr. Finch said quietly. 3 years ago, they saw it. She said it wasn't relevant." Frederick's voice was hollow. "Dr. Chen told me it didn't matter." Dr. Torres flipped through more pages. Johns Hopkins. A similar note, 5 years ago. Minor obstruction observed. Right canal. Not contributory to hearing loss. Stanford. 4 years ago. Wax buildup noted. Standard for pediatric patients. "They all saw it," Dr. Torres said. "Every single one." Frederick stared at the words, at the notes, at the years of missed opportunities. They assumed, Dr. Finch continued. They saw the congenital diagnosis first and stopped looking deeper. Confirmation bias. It happens. It happens? Frederick's voice cracked. My son suffered for 7 years because it happens? No one answered. Frederick turned slowly toward Linda. She stood by the doorway, still in her blood-stained uniform, hands clasped, waiting to be fired, or arrested, or both. Frederick crossed the room. Linda's breath caught. He stopped in front of her. Then he knelt. On the marble floor of his own mansion, a billionaire knelt before his maid. Forgive me, Frederick whispered. Linda's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Sanders, you saw what I refused to see. You acted when I chose certainty over truth. His voice broke. You saved my son, and I almost had you arrested for it. You didn't know. I didn't want to know. Frederick looked up at her. Pride told me the doctors were right. Money told me I'd done enough. Credentials told me to trust authority. He swallowed. But you just paid attention. The staff stood frozen, witnessing a reversal no one had imagined. Mrs. Winters wiped her eyes. Margaret E. Walker stared at the floor. The paramedics watched in silence. Patrick slid off his chair, walked to his father. Dad? Frederick turned, pulled his son close. I'm here, Patrick. I'm here. I can hear you, Patrick whispered. His small hand pressed against Frederick's chest, feeling the vibration of his father's heartbeat. You sound nice. Frederick's composure shattered completely. He held his son and wept. For Catherine. For 7 lost years. For the truth he'd been too proud to see. Patrick listened to his father cry for the first time, and understood, without words, what the sound meant. Love. Finally heard. 6 months later, Patrick sat in a therapy room at Yale New Haven Hospital, headphones on, repeating words he'd never spoken before. Butterfly. Rainbow. Music. His hearing had stabilized at 70% capacity in the right ear. Miraculous, considering the damage. The left ear, unaffected by the obstruction, functioned perfectly. Dr. Rebecca Lawson, his speech therapist, smiled. You're doing beautifully, Patrick. Patrick grinned. He loved that word. Beautiful. The way it sounded, the way it felt in his mouth. Frederick watched from the observation room, his hand pressed against the glass. Beside him stood Linda. Not in a uniform, in a tailored dress, hair down, confident. He has come so far, Linda said softly. Frederick nodded. Because of you. Linda's life had changed the day Patrick spoke. Frederick had offered her a position, Director of Household Affairs, with a salary that erased her debts in a single payment. Michael's hearing aids were upgraded. Rent paid a year in advance. But more than money, Linda had gained something she'd never expected. Respect. The staff no longer looked through her. Frederick consulted her on Patrick's care. Doctors asked her observations before making decisions. She mattered. Frederick had channeled his guilt into action. The Sanders Foundation for Medical Accountability launched 3 months after Patrick's recovery, funding second opinions, training doctors to question assumptions, advocating for patients dismissed by institutional certainty. Sometimes the person who sees the truth isn't the one with credentials, Frederick had said at the press conference. Sometimes it's the one who's willing to look. The mansion was different now. Music played in the hallways, Patrick's choice. Classical, jazz, anything with sound. Laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent for 7 years. Patrick had friends now. Birthday parties. Playdates where he showed off his hearing aids like trophies. One Saturday afternoon, Linda found him in the sunroom, the same room where he'd collapsed 6 months ago. But this time, he wasn't alone. He was building a model airplane with Frederick, both of them talking, laughing, arguing good-naturedly about which wing went where. No, Dad. This piece, Patrick said, holding up a small part. Are you sure? I can read, Dad. It says right here. Frederick laughed. All right. You win. Patrick beamed. Then he heard Linda's footsteps and turned. Linda, come help us. Dad's messing it up. I am not. You totally are. Linda smiled, crossed the room, knelt beside them. Frederick met her eyes over Patrick's head. No words needed, just gratitude. Patrick held up the airplane, examined it critically, then laughed pure, unfiltered joy. The sound filled the room, the house, the space where silence had once ruled. And Linda understood something she'd always known but never quite believed. Sometimes the miracle isn't money. Sometimes it isn't medicine. Sometimes it's just someone willing to pay attention, to see what others missed, to listen when no one else would. The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. Patrick heard it and smiled.